June 4th, 1943. A train cuts through the Texas night, carrying 1,150 veterans of Rommel's Afrika Korps toward an uncertain fate. Inside one of the passenger cars, not cattle wagons, but actual Pullman coaches with cushioned seats, a young German soldier named Unteroffizier Werner Burkhardt stares out the window. What he sees defies everything he's been told about America. Electric lights everywhere. Every farmhouse blazes with illumination. Street lamps line empty roads. Shop windows glow in towns they pass through. An endless constellation of electricity stretching across the Texas plains at 10 o'clock at night. Werner's hand trembles as he writes in his hidden diary, words that could earn him solitary confinement if discovered by his own officers. The Americans must be lying to us. No nation could possess such abundance while fighting a war on two fronts. Back in Germany, blackout regulations had plunged the Reich into darkness since 1940. Even before the war, barely 1 in 5 German farms had electricity. Yet here, in what Nazi propaganda called a decadent, collapsed America, electricity flowed like water. Werner wasn't alone in his shock. What none of these prisoners knew was that they were about to experience the most profound psychological transformation in modern POW history. A systematic demolition of Nazi ideology through the simple, overwhelming display of American industrial power. This is the story of how America won a war, not just with weapons, but with abundance, how enemy soldiers were converted not by propaganda, but by prosperity, and how German prisoners of war became witnesses to something their leaders had told them was impossible. The journey to this moment had begun 3 weeks earlier in Tunisia. May 13th, 1943. General Jürgen von Arnim, Rommel's replacement, surrendered along with approximately 250,000 German and Italian soldiers. The Wehrmacht's most experienced desert fighters, men who had driven the British back to Egypt, who had earned Montgomery's grudging respect, were suddenly prisoners. Among them was Feldwebel Friedrich Radke, holder of the Iron Cross First Class, veteran of the France campaign, wounded twice in North Africa. His diary would later provide historians with the most detailed account of what happened next. The processing began in Oran, Algeria. American efficiency was already cracking their preconceptions. The U.S. Army processed thousands of prisoners daily with organizational precision that exceeded anything the Wehrmacht had achieved at the height of its power. Identity cards, photographs, medical exams, inoculations, Geneva Convention rights explained in fluent German by American officers trained specifically for this task. But the first real shock came with the food. Oberfeldwebel Hans Müller, captured with the 21st Panzer Division, would later write to his mother, "In the cage at Oran, while we waited for ships, the Americans fed us better than we had eaten in 6 months of desert warfare. White bread, real coffee, meat twice a day. We thought it was propaganda that they were trying to impress us. We didn't realize this was their standard military ration." The Liberty ships that carried them across the Atlantic were themselves monuments to American industrial capacity. The SS Robert E. Peary had been built in 4 days, 15 hours, and 29 minutes at Kaiser shipyards in Richmond, California. These vessels were being produced at a rate of 3 per day. The 2-week Atlantic crossing provided the second phase of psychological demolition. Feldwebel Kurt Zimmermann of the 90th Light Division kept detailed notes. "The ship's crew disposed of more food waste each day than my entire company received in weekly rations during the final months in Africa. American sailors threw away half-eaten steaks, whole loaves of bread, gallons of milk. They did this openly, without thought, because to them this waste meant nothing. Their supply was limitless." As their ship approached the American coast in early August, Oberstleutnant Wilhelm von Steuben, whose aristocratic Prussian family had served in every German war since Frederick the Great, watched the radar antenna rotating above the bridge. He would later write, "This technology, which we believed only we and perhaps the British possessed in limited quantities, was standard equipment on a cargo vessel. It was then I first suspected that Germany had already lost the war." August 2nd, 1943. Norfolk Naval Base, Virginia. The first sight of America shattered what remained of Nazi propaganda. The Norfolk base sprawled across 4,300 acres. Its docks stretched for miles. Its cranes loaded and unloaded dozens of ships simultaneously. In a single day, this one port handled more tonnage than the entire German port of Hamburg managed in a week. Gefreiter Johann Weber counted 47 cargo ships in various stages of loading. Each crane lifted loads that would have required a dozen men and horses in Germany. "They moved with electric power," he noted in his diary, "smoothly, continuously, without the coal smoke that choked our industrial cities." Then came the march to the trains. Along the route, they passed parking lots filled with civilian automobiles, hundreds of them belonging to dock workers. In Germany, private automobile ownership remained a privilege of the wealthy and party elite. The Volkswagen, promised to the German people since 1934, remained a propaganda dream, fewer than 1,000 ever delivered to civilians. Here, ordinary laborers drove to work in their own cars, but nothing prepared them for the trains themselves. Not boxcars, not the 40-and-8 wagons that carried 40 men or 8 horses, but full passenger coaches, Pullman cars with padded seats that converted to sleeping berths, dining cars with white tablecloths and silver cutlery, observation cars with panoramic windows. Feldwebel Radke wrote, "We boarded like tourists, not prisoners. The American guards seemed almost embarrassed by the comfort. One sergeant apologized that the air conditioning wasn't working properly in our car. Air conditioning, in August. We had believed such luxury existed only in Hitler's personal train." The 3-day journey from Norfolk to the camps of Texas and Oklahoma proved more destructive to Nazi ideology than any military defeat. As the trains rolled through Virginia, the prisoners pressed their faces against windows, witnessing an America that couldn't exist according to everything they'd been told. Every small town blazed with light. Martinsville, Danville, Greensboro. Communities that in Germany would have been lucky to have a single electric street lamp displayed illuminated shop windows, electric signs, houses with lights burning in multiple rooms. They passed factories running night shifts, windows glowing, parking lots full even at midnight. Oberfeldwebel Meyer, whose father was a Nazi party block leader in Hamburg, wrote, "We passed through dozens of cities that first night. Everyone had more electricity than all of Hamburg. The guards told us this was normal, that every American town had electricity since the 1920s. I called him a liar. He just shrugged and said we would see." In Roanoke, Virginia, the train stopped for water and coal. The prisoners watched as American railway workers performed in 30 minutes what would have taken 2 hours in Germany. Automated coal loaders, electric water pumps, mechanized lubrication systems. More disturbing still was the casual wealth of the workers themselves. They wore leather boots that would have cost a German laborer 2 months' wages. They drank Coca-Cola from glass bottles and threw the empties away without thought. They smoked cigarettes continuously, stubbing them out half-finished. Feldwebel Heinrich Müller, an electrical engineer from Siemens before the war, calculated that the single railway yard used more electricity in 1 hour than his entire district in Berlin used in a day. "The waste was magnificent," he wrote. "They left lights burning in empty buildings. Electric fans ran in vacant rooms. It was the carelessness of infinite resource." As the trains crossed into Tennessee and Kentucky, the prisoners encountered American industrial power in full display. The Alcoa aluminum plant in Tennessee stretched for 3 miles along the river. Its electric furnaces consumed 175,000 kilowatts of power, more than the entire city of Munich. Near Louisville, they passed the Rubbertown complex, 4 massive synthetic rubber plants, each employing thousands of workers, producing 800,000 tons annually. Germany, despite inventing the process, had never managed more than 120,000 tons in its best year. Oberleutnant Erich Hoffmann, a chemist from IG Farben, understood the implications immediately. In a post-war interview, he recalled, "I knew those plants. I could see the distillation columns, the catalytic crackers. Each facility was more advanced than anything we had built, and there were 4 of them just in this one location. They told us there were dozens more across the country." Udine, the trains passed Ford's Willow Run plant outside Detroit, visible from miles away. This single factory, built in just 9 months, produced a B-24 Liberator bomber every 63 minutes. At peak production, 42,000 workers assembled bombers from 1.5 million parts, manufactured by 1,500 subcontractors. Hauptmann Werner, a Luftwaffe pilot shot down over Tunisia, pressed his face against the window. He counted 17 B-24s in various stages of completion. "We had been told American planes were inferior, hastily built, would fall apart in combat," he wrote. "But I could see the precision of the assembly lines, the quality of the construction. These were not inferior aircraft. They were simply built faster than we could imagine possible." In St. Louis, they crossed the Mississippi River, while below them, barges carried more grain than the entire German harvest of 1942. Grain elevators stretched along both banks, each one holding enough wheat to feed a German city for months. Unteroffizier Karl Schmidt, a farmer's son from Bavaria, wrote, "The Americans transport food as we transport ammunition, in endless quantities without concern for loss. I watched them loading a single barge with enough wheat to feed my entire village for 5 years. The crane operator was eating a sandwich with meat thicker than our weekly ration." Bis. In Kansas City, the train stopped at massive stockyards where tens of thousands of cattle waited for slaughter. German POWs who had subsisted on 200 grams of meat per week in Africa, when lucky, watched American workers eating beef sandwiches during their lunch break. "They ate meat like we ate bread," wrote Gefreiter Paul Fischer. "No, that's wrong. They ate meat like we wished we could eat bread. The guard bought us hamburgers from a stand near the station. Meat, cheese, vegetables on white bread for 15 cents. He bought 20 of them without thinking. This was not special. This was their normal food." The arrival at the camps themselves provided the next level of cognitive demolition. Camp Hearn, Texas, built in just 4 months, housed between 3,000 and 4,800 prisoners in conditions that exceeded what most had known as civilians. Wooden barracks with electric lights, flush toilets, hot showers, and steam heat. Each building constructed with more lumber than entire German villages possessed. The camp hospital astounded the medical personnel among the prisoners. Oberstarzt Dr. Friedrich Bauer, chief surgeon of the 164th Light Division, found himself in a facility better equipped than most German civilian hospitals. X-ray machines, surgical equipment, pharmaceutical supplies that had been unavailable in Germany since 1941. They had penicillin, Dr. Bauer would later testify. This miracle drug that we had only heard rumors about. They used it freely, even on prisoners with minor infections. German soldiers were dying for want of basic sulfur drugs, and the Americans were giving us their most advanced medicine without hesitation. The camp kitchen became another classroom in American prosperity. Walk-in refrigerators, electric mixers, automated dishwashers, gas ranges that could prepare meals for 5,000 men. The daily ration included fresh milk, eggs, meat, vegetables, and white bread, quantities that German civilians hadn't seen since 1939. Feldwebel Otto Krebs, a former hotel chef from Munich, wrote, "Today we threw away more food than my family has seen in 3 years. Not spoiled food, simply excess. The American regulations require we prepare 10% more than needed to ensure every prisoner receives full rations. The surplus is discarded. I wept as I threw perfectly good bread into the garbage. By September 1943, the labor shortage in American agriculture led to the employment of POWs in fields and factories. This decision would prove more destructive to Nazi ideology than any propaganda program could have achieved. Groups of prisoners were trucked daily to work sites, traveling through the American heartland without blindfolds or restricted routes. They saw everything. At a cotton gin outside Houston, Unteroffizier Herbert Lang watched a single machine process more cotton in 1 hour than his entire village could have handled in a month using traditional methods. The farmer who owned the gin was nobody special, Lang recorded. Not aristocracy, not a party member, just a farmer. Yet he had electricity, running water, a truck, a car, and a tractor. His workers, including the Negroes, ate lunch from boxes containing more food than German workers received in a week. And this was normal. Every farm we passed was the same. In Nebraska, prisoners worked in sugar beet fields, witnessing agricultural mechanization that defied comprehension. A single combine harvester could do the work of 100 men. The fields stretched to the horizon, each one larger than entire German counties. Gefreiter Wilhelm Hoffmann, working on a farm outside Scottsbluff, wrote, "The farmer's son, a boy of 16, drove a tractor worth more than everything my father had earned in his lifetime. When I mentioned this, the boy laughed and said it wasn't even a particularly good tractor. His father was waiting for a new model from John Deere that would be even better." The most devastating revelations came to those prisoners who worked near American factories. At a Campbell soup factory in New Jersey, prisoners watched production lines that processed more tomatoes in a single day than most German factories handled in a month. The facility operated with a skeleton crew of women and elderly men. Most young workers were in the military, yet production exceeded peacetime levels. Stabsfeldwebel Ernst Wagner, who had worked in a German food processing plant before the war, documented the experience. Everything was automated. Electric conveyor belts, automatic filling machines, steam cookers that processed hundreds of cans simultaneously. One elderly woman monitored controls that managed what would have required 50 workers in Germany. She did this while listening to a radio and drinking coffee. Near Detroit, prisoners unloading coal at a power plant gained glimpses of the automotive industry's conversion to war production. The River Rouge complex employed 100,000 workers producing jeeps, aircraft engines, and tanks. The plant consumed 1.5 million kilowatts of electricity daily, more than the entire city of Hamburg. "We could see the parking lots," wrote Oberfeldwebel Franz Kellner. "Thousands of cars belonging to workers. In Germany, even our officers rarely owned cars. Here, factory workers drove to work. The guard told us many workers owned 2 cars, one for work, one for family use. We thought he was mocking us." By winter 1943, American intelligence officers noted what they called ideological collapse syndrome among the prisoners. The Special Projects Division, the secret re-education program, documented increasing numbers of prisoners requesting access to American newspapers, books, and educational materials. Major Paul Newland reported in December 1943, "The prisoners no longer argue when shown production statistics. They have seen too much. The most fanatical Nazis have become quiet. They still maintain loyalty to Germany, but no longer speak of victory. Many openly question what they were told about America." Lieutenant Hermann Goetz, captured with the 10th Panzer Division, wrote in a letter that passed American censors, "We were told America was a mongrel nation, weak, divided, controlled by Jews, incapable of military prowess. Every day I am here, I see the opposite. This is the most organized, unified, and powerful nation on earth. We were told fairy tales by criminals." Christmas, 1943, provided the most profound psychological impact. American organizations, churches, and civic groups sent 500,000 Christmas packages to German POWs, enemies who had been trying to kill American soldiers months earlier. Each package contained cigarettes, candy, toiletries, and games. Local communities invited prisoners to Christmas dinners. At Camp Herne, the local Methodist church choir performed Christmas carols in German. Women from Herne sent homemade cookies and cakes. The Boy Scouts delivered handmade Christmas cards. This kindness toward enemies shattered the final remnants of Nazi racial theory. Oberleutnant Walter Möller, whose brother had died in the bombing of Hamburg, wrote, "They know we are their enemies. Many have sons and husbands fighting against our armies. Yet they show us Christian charity, not propaganda, but genuine kindness. What kind of people treat enemies this way? Only those absolutely certain of victory and secure in their power." The Christmas feast itself defied comprehension. Turkey, ham, mashed potatoes, gravy, vegetables, pies, ice cream, quantities of food that Germany hadn't seen since before the First World War. "We ate like kings," wrote Feldwebel Hans Bauer. "Better than German generals eat, better than party leaders." And this was not special. The guards told us this was a normal American Christmas dinner, that every American family was eating the same meal. If they can feed prisoners this way, what must their own soldiers eat? By early 1944, over 40,000 German prisoners were enrolled in educational programs. They studied English, American history, mathematics, and sciences. The University of Chicago provided correspondence courses. Stanford sent professors to lecture on democracy and economics. Oberarzt Dr. Wilhelm von Braun, a physicist conscripted from the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute, attended lectures on atomic physics at Camp Shelby. He later wrote, "American professors, including Jewish refugees from Germany, taught us without hatred. They spoke of science as universal, belonging to all humanity. They were years ahead of German research, and they shared knowledge with enemies. This generosity of spirit was incomprehensible to minds shaped by Nazi ideology." Whiskey. When news of the Normandy invasion reached the camps on June 6, 1944, German prisoners experienced their final ideological collapse. The scale of the operation, 6,000 ships, 11,000 aircraft, 150,000 men in the first wave, demonstrated American organizational capacity beyond Nazi Germany's wildest dreams. Oberst Friedrich von Tauben wrote, "We knew then that everything was lost, not just the war, but the entire Nazi project. We had challenged the world's greatest industrial power with fairy tales and racial mythology. We sent horses against their trucks, rifles against their automatic weapons, courage against their unlimited resources. Between 1945 and 1946, 371,683 German POWs were repatriated from American camps. They returned to a Germany divided, destroyed, and destitute. But they brought something precious: knowledge of how a democratic industrial society functioned. Many former POWs rose to prominence in West Germany's reconstruction. Hans Kroll, prisoner at Camp Shelby, became West German ambassador to the United States. Walter Hallstein, who taught classes at Camp Como, became president of the European Commission. They brought American methods to German industry, American efficiency to German agriculture, and American democratic ideals to German politics. We learned that prosperity came from freedom, not conquest, Hans Kroll wrote in his memoirs. We saw that democracy created wealth, that diversity brought strength, that treating workers well increased production. These lessons, learned as prisoners, shaped the new Germany. In 1985, on the 40th anniversary of the war's end, over 500 former German POWs returned to America for a reunion in Austin, Texas. Many brought their families to show them where their transformation had begun. Former Oberfeldwebel Hans Weber, who had returned to become a physician in Georgetown, Maine, spoke at the reunion. Life in the camps was a vast improvement for many of us who had grown up in cold water flats in Germany. We discovered running water, central heating and abundant food. But more than that, we discovered dignity. Former Oberst Hermann Göring, no relation to the Reichsmarshal, then 78 years old, delivered the keynote address. We came to America as enemies, as Nazis, as believers in a lie. We left as friends, as Democrats, as men who had seen the truth. America showed us that strength comes not from conquest, but from production, not from hatred, but from diversity, not from tyranny, but from freedom. We witnessed the arsenal of democracy at full production. We saw farmers who produced food for the world, workers who built the tools of victory, and citizens who treated enemies with dignity. We learned that America's true weapon was not its bombs or tanks, but its inexhaustible capacity for creation and its unshakable confidence. To America from your former enemies, now your friends, thank you for showing us the way. The auditorium erupted in standing ovation, Americans and Germans together, former enemies united in recognition of a transformation that had seemed impossible when those first trains rolled into Texas in June 1943. The German POWs had arrived in America expecting to find a weak, divided nation on the verge of collapse. Instead, they discovered an industrial colossus of unlimited power and surprising humanity. They came as prisoners of war. They left as witnesses to the arsenal of democracy at its absolute peak. And in their transformation lay the seeds of Europe's post-war redemption and the final defeat of the Nazi dream. If this story of transformation and redemption moved you, please consider subscribing to the channel. We bring you forgotten stories from history that reveal profound truths about human nature, conflict, and reconciliation. Hit that like button if you appreciated learning about this remarkable chapter of World War II, when America's greatest weapon wasn't military might, but the simple power of prosperity and dignity. And if you want to explore more stories like this, tales of historical turning points that changed the course of nations, turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. What did you think of this story? Did it change your perspective on how wars are truly won? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.